nursing, people used to do nursing, which women, construction, we have women in construction. It's like we have engineering, you know. I have a friend of mine who did mechanical engineering, you know, and she's doing amazingly, right? So I don't know, maybe, you know, listeners can come in and tell us what I is. Of course, we know pregnancy, you know, although it's a profession, you know, those others have made it quite a profession.
Listen, a sterling job at it.
So the right or the freedom of profession, you are allowed to try out whatever you would like to try out. Do you want to be a journalist? Yay. Do you want to be a disc jockey? Awesome. I think we have that covered. And in our constitution, we have that freedom completely covered, and everybody is allowed to try out anything they might want to try, as long as it's mentally and physically possible. Okay?
I think it's also by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
And that is where it comes from. That's where our Bill of Rights actually, you know, comes from. And when we talk in our profession, you have a freedom of profession, guys. We are not talking about prostitution. A few years ago.
You know, like give me a heads up.
Do you know, Kuti, people actually call that a profession? Anzi is the oldest profession. Exactly. Or it is not a profession in terms of our constitution. Now, what you know, since we are there,
in terms of the constitution, yes, but it's a lucrative business, so many can argue. Exactly. Many have argued this so many times.
Erika, we want to give people options out there. Okay, remember we said it was illegal, okay? All these other things, you know, etc., etc. So, can I see freedom of profession, please? Dangwetin, do you say a disclaimer? We are not talking about that one, which is called the oldest profession. I don't even know if that's actually the oldest profession, for crying out loud. In the Garden of Eden, I don't think that was there. So
many would argue.
Yeah, someone would argue. And then we have freedom of trade, right? Freedom of trade. And obviously, can I start a profession to talk that I like something that you can be a professional in, something you can train in, etc. Freedom of trade, munobvumidzwa kuita macross border, apana nokurambidza, munobvumidzwa kundongwavha kuma-mines, you know, as long as it's legal. Okay, so a person can get into any business that they feel they will benefit society from or through, and that they feel that they can make a living out of. So you are allowed. So long you are allowed to go and try out anything, to explore, you know, try it, you know, in
legally.
Fact, legally. In fact, of course, the advice that we always give out is to say, sometimes it's actually good to, you know, like you know, you can trade anything, but sometimes, Erica, I don't know what you think. My vendors, not nyefe, okay, rugare, right, or chomolia, whatever. Then the next person, ane chomolia, ane rugare. Then the next person,
I probably will get lashback for this, but whenever I see that, I always think I think of it so many times, like 19 million.
Exactly.
Illegally,
banana, apple.
Why not just go to the next corner so that you're providing convenience to the other people?
Maybe
maybe something we don't get.
Security numbers, you know, no, I'm just kidding.
What?
Okay, so yeah, but also in as much as we think it's actually cool, I think sometimes a product which is popular, there's nothing wrong in pursuing that. But also, like to what you're saying, try something different. You know, there is freedom, and that's the whole point of saying there's freedom of trade. You know, try something different. You know, who knows? You might be coming up with something that works properly. Then we have, of course, the freedom of occupation. I think in freedom of profession, which is really you can't, you know, apasisina zvaisimbotaura kare zvezvekunzi madzimai akwanisa kuita izvi kana kuti varume zivai zvekwenyu izvi ndezvevakadzi or whatever. No, I don't think that is there anymore. And then now, once we get into the office, right, or pamaini pachona kana kuti papurazi pachona pari kushandwa ipapapa, what are the rights that attain? I'm just going to deal with the basic rights, okay? Takataisa time yedu. So you have a right to fair and safe labor practices. Now let me go to Kanachiti Fair. I think we spoke about equality last week, so we won't press on that too much. Kanachiti Fair, every person must be treated in a fair way according to your grade, okay? So essentially, I think we mentioned kuti equal remuneration for equal effort. Kana muri pa grade 13, whatever that will be meaning in you know, in your company. Achichaita kuti zvinzi vamwe vanonzi uchishanda patable pakushanda papo unozoitawo futi uchichaira, maybe because you're a woman kana kuti ndiononga uzobikira vamwe tea because ndowega mudzimai pano. And you know what, that is still happening actually in companies, and that's why we have to keep on talking about it. Kana inini ndiri patii nhasi kana ngatiteera roster, you know, your course kubasa uko anditi katitora kumba kubasa yekumba hatisataenda tapinda ikokoko. But kana chinzi kuchabikwa tea kana kuti kuchaita duty rekucleana, then within that same grade people must be able to do you know, take turns and do a roster, right? So fair practice, fair labor practice, and safe. Can I stress on this one? Kuti, where people are working not particularly, let's say in a mine, it is actually not just a legal right, but it's actually a legal requirement. Kuti, mupiwe equipment, safety equipment that protects your body, right? That protects your person and your eyes. It protects your, you know, just your person from harm. Because tikati vanhu vemomine, vanhu vari kupinda vachipinda mashafts, they don't have those safety hats. They don't have the overalls that they need to put on because kune dynamite inenge iriko ikoko, kune chemicals anoshandiswa, there all those things. So it's actually a legal requirement. It's not just a right, you know, but it can actually, it's actually an unfair labor practice, and it could actually be criminal, you know, to allow people to be exposed to danger pabas. All right, let's talk about people who are working in a factory, right? Kuna anoshanta in a factory, let's say it's a welding thing. I think we once spoke about it some time back. Kana handle welding machines. They need that protective gear and which will protect their eyes, because a lot of people but if we were to check workmen's compensation, if we were to go to NASA, within this past year, how many people were actually injured vachishandisa all those, you know, dangerous welding machines, kana kuti vari kubata chemicals, you know, like sulfuric acid. Somebody is dealing with like sulfuric acid, somebody's dealing with dangerous chemicals, and havana kupiwa safety protective material, right? That is horrible. Let's take somebody who's on a farm, right? I should drive a tractor usiku. You know, just think of it. And they don't have that safety reflexive gear where people who are driving past or whatever can actually see them, you know, because it could reflect, and then they get into some accidents. So all those things, you know, especially for workers, shame. People are suffering a lot of injuries per basa. So when we're talking about a person must have safety gear. That is part of what we call providing your workers with safe and fair environments. Okay? And then we go on to a fair and reasonable wage. You know, somebody actually called me. Somebody called me for my aid last night. You know, I'm not always available to pick up calls, but sometimes I do. And I did pick up a call. She can't say, way. Inini, I can't get to complain out and like enough for the work I'm doing. But she didn't 4 months. And about 4 months, it's $50. chikanzi chimbondozororai kumba you know chimboendai and chikanzi saka ndoita sei, you know, what do I do, because patakazoenda ndakushaudwa manje. So this touches on two things. Number one, munhu ari kushanda basa raari kushanda munenge manegotiate anditaka and sometimes people are so desperate they take a salary it is so low, you know, yekuti iye chero kurarama hatokwanise. So I think it's proper for employers kuti vapewo munhu mari inowira nebasa raari kuita. And in fact that is the importance of belonging to trade unions. That's the importance of belonging to national employment councils, you know. Why? Because they allow you to bargain collectively. I'm sure, Ms. Erica, you've heard of collective bargaining agreements. So when we say collective bargaining agreements, you know, na boss wangu ndichiti inini salary yangu yanaokwana. But when you join an NEC, whatever for the trade yaunayo, is it for the catering industry, is it for the manufacturing industry, is it for the farming industry, is it for schools, for the education, you know, what's name, it's important that you make sure that you are part of that collective bargaining arena, okay? Because what then happens is they collectively bargain with your employer or with various employers within that, you know, within that group of services. And it's like, if I'm saying like for the catering industry, then they will come up with minimum wages. And it is. So already, I'm glad, but in terms of our labor law, it's actually possible to get minimum wages. And it is. Also for domestic workers, it's minimum wages. For guys who are gardeners, minimum wages. And that's just fair. It's never enough, of course. But $20 you get where I'm coming from, yeah.
Is there a standard set amount for gardeners and maids?
Yes.
There is?
There definitely is, and they're always revising it. And that's exciting because that always comes up under my statutory instruments.
What is that calculated against? I can imagine it should differ with the amount of people in the household and. So, you know, what does the law, how does the law then, this labor laws? It
groups van.
Okay.
Let me just take like a housekeeper, right? A housekeeper or a house help. Okay, if you're just a housekeeper, I don't get a housekeeping chete, right? An elderly person who's being looked after. They can have a different rate for that. But you might also see sometimes they can just lump them all. Look, housekeeping is housekeeping. Maybe no one tanga nasi gogo vasati vakurwara and then gogo vanosoweya papa yakanoti maybe apasati pane vana or they know young kids, whatever. So they sort of like lump it all together, right? And if there are now more professional requirements made, like maybe you're now also additionally giving services of like a nurse aid, and then they'll say, look, maybe we can push it a bit higher. But they're always looking at that. And with our African high context, culture.
I was trying to imagine, but calculate against what order. It says there's a question here. I think we could maybe just tackle it in the 10 minutes we've got. Advocate, trade cinema companies attachments. It's a conversation I hear a lot in the streets. What does the law say about attachments and remuneration? Also, just benefit to the company. There's a lot that's there.
You know what? That one is a hard one, and I think somebody actually once came and asked me about that. What happens is nenya attachment, because it's part of your continued education, and it's actually a requirement for what you're supposed to be for you to qualify and graduate. We have the Zimbabwe Development Fund, I think that's what it's called, ZimDef, that's what we used to call it. And they're the ones who would usually remunerate students on attachment, But that was also during a time when our country was doing very well economically, Now I think kind of achieve fund are specialized. They can't really fund everybody, you know. So I don't think that, as far as I am aware, I don't think that there is a legal requirement to pay anyone on attachment, right? Usually because you're coming in for training. And what I have found interesting, though, is colleges and universities which require a student to pay school fees during attachment. You know what I mean? To say, repair attachment, I need to come. But you still have to pay tuition, right?
For what services during that time?
Well, I think what I have been advised is for it's for supervision and for it's for supervision and I suppose receiving reports and marking them and whatever. So so I thought it was actually quite interesting. So it seems like in the it's a thing. But however, if you then take on a student beyond you know the time of attachment then I think there must be some kind of agreement, because akuto offer a service, you know. It's no longer just ngoti mwana aripa attachment. But as far as I know, apana an actual legal obligation to pay students on attachment, because they're actually being attached. If anything, they're using company stationery, they're using company time. We're actually giving them a service to allow them to learn a bit better about the profession practically.
Moving right along, speaking about labor and the law. Two questions that we could maybe answer all together. There's the question here, my helpers, my maids, my employers, you know, and lawful. That's one.
The other one,
The question is kokuma saloon, I think the questions really are borderlining on the watered down occupations where people think that what happens then? How does the law protect you in that?
It's actually funny because that's kind of like the same question you're gonna get from people. Atinambonyorana chino tikambowerana kuti $50 parume yangu iyoyo anditikakoka ndikangodzingwa zvinoita here kuti ndindoti ndadzingwa lawfully. Listen, as long as you're a human being and you're a citizen of Zimbabwe, okay, the law protects you. And you don't need a written contract for you to be protected by the law. It can be a verbal contract, okay? And you know kuti anasis vanayazo chandra the list we normally do for our own security. Pay ID yako, no photocopy or whatever the case may be, so I know who you are. But the thing is, akuna basa rekuti ndiri a house help and kana basa rekuti ndiri mubatsiri musalon, right? I cannot go and kundosungisa mono, because as long as you've created a labor arrangement and it's an employment arrangement where pane muna ariku momwe arikushandira momwe achipiwa salary, where this is at the end of the week, then there is some arrangement of remuneration. You are absolutely allowed kutoenda ku labor kundoti unfair labor practices. Azvina kuzofana kunge uri mucompany yakatonyorwa kunzi ningi and company yeah, you are a citizen, you are a worker. Ndosaka chitori neworkers day iri kuya manje manje, you know, tatoti arusha rwacho.
Hey, I'm going to turn off because we're workers. Thank you for putting weight on that occupation. I think people think it's watered down or it's not worthy of or something, and people don't know you can actually go.
Absolutely. And while we are there, guys, off days. Ne? Labor off days. It's important because I think I know people are 1 off day or 1.5 off days per week. Panama no shanda 7 days in church, you know. Tombo saka mwana pane mwana mlikodoti sire ani or whatever. If people are making you work on your off day, vanfana kuku remunerate as like overtime. Vanfana kutokupa mari no cover that off day. Iyoyo kana kuzokupa manga days ako zvinosenda. Kune chinhu chinonzi leave. Yo, you know what?
Advocate, you're stirring the pot here. Because I've witnessed so many cases where a house help will not say, holiday Christmas, and you see this helper so much. Ana weekend, marriage
kutoti fair labor practice iyoyo kutoti look ngatiwirirane, because I've had my house helps where I'm like isha ma one like this weekend cannot have this month pakatoipa uri kuona kuti tine situation yanditi, but ndichakukava wirirane kuti munokava na how, you know what I mean, because pana munhu ngonyarara, and I know kuti munhu anenge achinasodhipenda nebasa iroro asida kuita rock the boat, you know, and so that happens. Saka kune chinhu chinonzi leave. People should respect leave yavanhu. People should respect my off days yavanhu. People should respect maternity leave. Kana pane chinhu chinoitisa vanhu BP kumabasa kuti because unless you're like a person arikuti a year, even if it's a year, you are entitled to your maternity leave, which is paid, right? Saka kwero kuti kana ukaenda saka tikubhadhare because hausi so all those things, you're just raising these issues. It's amazing.
They're raining in. We've got 3 minutes. I don't know if you can maybe touch on this one. And the co-advocate, my companies anoramba ko consider workers union. Anotoramba kuti muite workers union. Is that
it's illegal? It's illegal because one of the things that I just mentioned is kuti it is your right, and it's your legal right under the Bill of Rights to join an association that represents your interests. That trade union, that National Employment Council. Saka employer arikutoita a criminal offense afana tondo reportwa ahabvumidzwe because it's supposed to assist with fair labor practices.
More interesting is this. Kokana ndichida kutekesa ma leave days edu ku company inokodzera yekuramba kumatenga here. Does that happen?
Yeah, it happens.
Saka avabvumidzwa kuramba futi kutenga ma leave.
Vanobvumidzwa kuramba depending on mari dziripo. Okay, maybe vamwe vanogona kutongeta policy yekuti hatitengese ma leave days endai kuleave. Because sometimes it's healthy for you to go and leave. It's healthy for us as a company because we can assess office yako sipo. You know what I mean? Some people kachiboti anenge aripo achishanda gore rese. Pane zvakawanda mapeta ari makabhodhu atifanira kuti kana wamboenda kwachindofema iwe kwachibhenefita tombovhura toona kuti zvinhu zvese zviri correct here panapa, right? So it's not a legal obligation for any employer kuti atenge ma-leave days ako unless it is something chiri absolutely out of this world, but there's no legal requirement for that. My employers are not because they just need you, okay? And maybe it's a policy. You can only sell up to 10 days, up to 15 days. It depends. But there's no legal obligation, guys. You don't...
I can imagine.
We don't have to buy your leave days. And I could leave, and I could leave.
Again, like you said, for health reasons, it's just go on leave.
Yeah.
Advocate, first run out of time. I like to think that we're going to push this over or season it to next week.
Yeah.
There's a lot with labor. When you said labor, I was like, that's a whole 3 weeks. So many questions. We'll just take them and move them over to next week. How do we catch up with you in between today and next week?
Guys, Advocate Nyari Maphosa or Nyaradzo Maphosa on all the social media handles. 0771 111 099 771 111 099, and we carry on with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Advocate. We were touching on labor this